Hi guys. We will back in Paris at 1919s. The World War of 1914 to 1918 had ended, but peace had not yet been won. The guns fell silent on November 11, 1918, due to an armistice, a ceasefire, not a treaty. The true end to the conflict, the formal establishment of a new global order, would be decided in the gilded halls of the French capital. The winter of 1919 saw Paris become the nerve center of the world. Delegates from 32 nations and 5 dominions of the British Empire converged on the city. It was an assembly of unprecedented scale, an attempt to rebuild a world left utterly shattered by 4 years of industrialized slaughter. Millions were dead, empires had been reduced to rubble, and the map of Europe, indeed, the world, was a blank slate waiting to be redrawn. The conference was dominated by the Big Four, the men who held the fate of nations in their hands: Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Georges Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Britain, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Their task was immense, and their interests were often mutually exclusive. Woodrow Wilson, a man of soaring ideals, arrived in Europe a near messianic figure. He brought with him his 14 points, a vision for a peace without victory, a world governed by open covenants, self-determination for oppressed peoples, and, crucially, a League of Nations to prevent future wars. He was a moral crusader, but one who soon found himself navigating the treacherous waters of European realpolitik. Georges Clemenceau, the aged but formidable French prime minister known as the Tiger, represented a nation that had sacrificed the most and suffered the most directly. For Clemenceau, the war was not an abstract ideal of freedom, it was a brutal reality of invasion and devastation. His goal was simple and stark: security for France and retribution against Germany. He famously remarked of Wilson, "God gave us the 10 Commandments and we broke them. Wilson gives us 14 points. We shall see." David Lloyd George of Great Britain was the pragmatic middleman, balancing Clemenceau's demand for vengeance with Wilson's call for reconciliation. He had just won an election on the populist promise to make Germany pay, yet he was shrewd enough to understand that a totally crippled Germany might fall to Bolshevism, which was spreading westward from Russia, a far greater fear for the British Empire than a resurgent Germany. Vittorio Orlando of Italy rounded out the quartet, primarily concerned with securing the territorial promises made to Italy in secret treaties that had enticed them to join the Allied side. The atmosphere in Paris was intense. Decisions were often made in closed-door sessions in hotel rooms, away from the formal meetings at the Quai d'Orsay. The process was fraught with tension, political maneuvering, and fundamental disagreements about the nature of justice and the future world order. The resulting document, finalized after 6 months of grueling negotiation, was the Treaty of Versailles. It was signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand had triggered the war, in the opulent Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles. The symbolism was intentional. It was the same room where the German Empire had been declared in 1871, a deliberate humiliation of the defeated power. The treaty was a compromise that ultimately satisfied almost no one. It stripped Germany of substantial territory, demilitarized the Rhineland, restricted its army to a mere 100,000 men, and demanded astronomical financial reparations. Crucially, the War Guilt Clause, Article 231, forced Germany to accept sole responsibility for starting the war, a bitter pill that fueled intense national resentment. Beyond Germany, the map of the world was fundamentally redrawn. The ancient Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires were dismantled, leading to the creation of new nations like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, and the establishment of mandates in the Middle East, creating problems that persist to this day. Wilson secured his League of Nations, the centerpiece of his idealistic vision. Yet, the punitive nature of the rest of the treaty undermined his call for a peace without victory. The Paris Peace Conference effectively ended the First World War, but it failed to establish an enduring peace. The decisions made in those tense Parisian hotels created a fragile stability built upon a foundation of German humiliation and American isolationism. As the U.S. Senate ultimately refused to ratify the treaty or join the League of Nations, the end of the war in Paris was not the beginning of a peaceful era. It was merely an uneasy intermission. The peace forged in 1919 contained the very seeds of the next, even more destructive, global conflict that would erupt just 2 decades later.